A good friend of mine recently purchased this rental property in northern Michigan at a ski and golf resort. It's basically just a hotel room, and by the looks of it, it hasn't been updated in quite some time. There's nothing seriously wrong with it. I mean, I've stayed in hotel rooms that didn't look half as good as this, but even so, I think I can make this room much nicer looking and hopefully boost the rental reservations for my buddy. The first thing I'm going to need to build will go right in this area, in place of that shelf hanger bracket thingy. I thought it would be cool to build this. It's basically a kitchenette cabinet. Down below there will be room for a mini fridge and 4 full extension drawers for storage. Above that will be a stone countertop with a coffee station, and on top of that will be an adjustable shelf with a microwave. Then to cap it off, I'll put some crown molding on the top to really jazz it up. All right, well, let's see how much plywood the neighbor has in his garage and get busy building. It really helps me to create cut list maps like this so that I can tell exactly how each sheet of plywood needs to be broken down. And if you can't fit a full-size sheet into your vehicle, something like this will show you exactly where to tell the guy at the big box store to cut it so that you'll be able to haul it home more easily. Then after he uses a wild beaver to gnaw it in half, you can take it home and use your track saw to further break it down and to put good clean edges on all the pieces. And once you have them broken down to a manageable size, you can fire up your table saw and cut out all the remaining pieces. Then I was sure to jot down the only type of Kool-Aid that I drink. And with everything cut to width, I could cut them to length over at the miter saw. Next came all the dados and rabbets, and for this I needed to change out my saw blade to one that has an FTG tooth set. Now that stands for Fluffy Trout Gymnastics, and the important thing about using an FTG blade is that it'll cut a curve that has perfectly flat top and square edges. Then once I had it set to the right height, I could run my pieces through. Then I just nudged the fence over a tiny bit and run them all through again. At this point, I could test fit a piece of 1/4-inch plywood to see if it fits in there well. And it looks good. Then I increased the depth just a bit to make deeper grooves. These will be for the backs of the cabinet to slide into. Now for the rest of the dados and rabbits, I figured it would be easier just to use a dado stack. Yeah, I could have done this with the other blade, but this will do it way faster and with no fence adjustments. Once I have it set up, I'll just slide the piece through and it's done. Then for the rabbits, I put on my sacrificial fence. This just gets clamped right onto my normal fence. Then once I got it tightened down, I can grab a piece of scrap wood and do some test cuts. With really small adjustments, I tap the fence closer and closer to the blade until I'm cutting exactly on the edge of the piece. And once I got it perfect, I can slide my pieces through and they will have a perfect 3/4-inch rabbet exactly on the edge. At this point, I'm ready to start putting this cabinet together. I started with the sides, and to help me hold things steady, I clamped on a couple of these L-shaped braces. Then once I got the pieces tipped up, I could adjust it so that it was in place and then check to see if I kept everything square. And since that worked pretty well, I just did it again and then popped on a clamp to pull everything in tight. Now the divider goes into the large dado in the center, so I added a bunch of glue, dropped it into place, lined up the grooves in the back, and then added on some clamps. Next, that wasn't me. That was the cabinet, honest. So next, I got this thing lifted down off my bench and situated it on the floor so that I could put in the supports. Now these things just get glued and fastened in, but since I didn't want any screws showing on the inside or outside of the cabinet, I just used pocket holes to hide them. Then I could do the other one. When the two front supports were secured in place, I could slide in the cabinet backs into the dados. And with those in, I could put in the two rear supports. Then each cabinet gets a couple nailers installed. These are used so that you can screw through them from the inside of the cabinet when it comes time to mount it to the wall. Next up was using this clever jig so that I could drill out a bunch of holes that will allow for the upper shelf to be adjustable. Now, after I had the base cabinet carcass put together, I could move on to the upper cabinet. And this thing went together pretty much in the same way. The sides got glued onto the top, the back slid into place, and the nailers attached onto the back. Everything got a thorough sanding. And then I could move on to making the face frames. I just cut the boards to length over at the miter saw and then ripped them into strips on the table saw. From there, I just ran a bead of glue down the front edge of the upper cabinet, dropped it in place, and clamped it on. And then the same thing on the other side. And for the top one, I just cut it to fit exactly between the two. Then I left it to dry, and I knew when it was done when all my clamps dissolved. For the face frame around the drawers, it was a little bit more involved. I started by fastening together the top to one of the sides. Then I used my 3-2-1 blocks to space out the next one so that it was exactly 6 inches down from the top one, and then I fastened it in. The next one needed to be 7 inches down, so I had to slide out the first block and then tip it up on the edge, and then I just repeated this down the line until I had the whole thing put together. When it was done, I could place it onto the cabinet, but then I noticed something. The side of the cabinet really cups inward, and I need to get that straight before I glue on the face frame. So to correct this, I put in a brace inside the other half of the cabinet, and then I configured one of my squeeze clamps to become a spreader, and I applied just enough pressure to straighten it out. Then I could drop the face frame in right over the top and then get it secured into place. The rest of the face frame went on super easily, and once it was all done, I could sand all the edges flush to the cabinet. With all that done, I could finally start to work on the drawer boxes. And to dress them up a bit, I decided to trim out the top edges with some very unnecessary walnut because it makes the ordinary plywood drawer box look amazing. So I cut down a bunch of skinny trim pieces on the table saw and then glued them onto the edges of all my drawer box pieces. And once they were dry, I could trim off the ends with a flush trim saw. Now I needed to come up with a way to trim off the edges so that they were flush. So I figured that would be a perfect task for my patent-pending Super Trimmer 5000. Basically, it straddles my table saw fence, but doesn't go all the way down to the surface. This allows the edge banding to actually slide underneath it while the piece stays flat against the fence. So now I can position it exactly against the blade and then just zip it through on both sides to trim off the excess edge banding so that it's perfectly flush. As for the boxes themselves, I didn't do anything fancy when putting them together. Just butt joints, a little bit of glue, and then I shot them together with a couple brads. The bottom got slid in, and then the final piece got nailed on, and well, there you go, a drawer box. Easy as that. Then to make the drawer faces, I bundled as many of the pieces together that were supposed to be identical so that I could cut them all at once. This ensures that they're all exactly the same length. Plus, it makes for a pretty satisfying shot. Then it was over to the router table where I had my coping sled and my rail bit installed. Each one of the rails, the horizontal pieces of the drawer face, gets a tenon cut in on both ends. Basically, it ends up looking just like this. Then the other router bit in the pair gets loaded in and adjusted so that it lines up perfectly to where the tenon was cut in the rails. Now all the pieces get sent through and get a dado cut down the inside edge. And when it comes to putting them together, it's actually kind of fun. The pieces almost snap together. I put a little glue on the ends of the rail and I stick them into the stiles. Slide the face panel in. And then I put on the other rail and give it a few taparoos to send it home. After that, I put it in the clamps to close up any remaining gaps and then set it off to the side to dry. Later, I glue in a back insert so that I have something to screw into when I go to mount them onto the drawer boxes. And lastly, I give them all a good sanding to finish them out. And you can tell just how nice the joints came out looking. They turned out great. Now it's time to put in the drawer slides. And for those, I'll be using the tandem undermount slides from Bloom. I've used these on several other projects of mine, and I can honestly tell you they are the best drawer slide you can get. To get them mounted in, I chose to mount in some spacer blocks to the side walls so that I could screw them right into that. But they also have different mounting options depending on your style of cabinet. Each slide has a little pin in the back that will lock your drawer box onto the rail. And to find exactly where that pin will contact the box, I usually just put my box in place, I center it just right, and then I smash it in the face with a hammer. The pins leave a tiny little dent where they hit, so I know just where to drill out the recess for them. Also, each set of slides comes with a couple clips that get mounted to the front underside of the drawer boxes. Now, each box can be set on top of the rails, the pins go into the holes in the back, and the clips hold the front of the drawer box in place with a couple satisfying clicks. And if you ever need to remove the drawer for any reason, just squeeze the front clips and the whole thing just pops out. Super easy. To get the rest of the slides installed, I just created a temporary shelf with some scrap wood and then screwed them all into place. Then I used some drawer face clamps to hold on the faces against the front of each box. Then I could make sure they were centered to the opening and perfectly level. Once I had each one looking good, I could secure them into place with a couple flathead screws from the inside. And that just about wraps up the drawers. Check this out. So smooth. I love it. Next up is crown molding. Now, I've only done this a few times, and I'm certain that there's multiple ways of doing it, but I'm going to show you how I do it, and then you can let me know in the comments how dumb I am for doing it this way. But basically, I build out a 3-sided frame first. Then over at the miter saw, I can tip the bevel over to 33.9 degrees. Then the miter gets adjusted to 31.6 degrees. I make sure the blade's not going to hit my fence, and then I can just slap down a piece of crown and make my first cut. Now I gotta reverse the bevel and miter angles so that they're the other way to make the other cut. Then I just repeat this for the remaining pieces. And since there's no good and easy way to clamp this, I don't use ordinary wood glue. Instead, I just squirt on a bunch of CA glue and activator and just hold it in place until it's dry. And that seemed to work just fine. Next, I created some spacers to hold the crown up just a bit around the outer edge of my frame to give it a classy reveal. And once I had it looking good, I just fired in a bunch of brads to secure it in place. Now the entire assembly can just be plopped down on top of the cabinet and then screwed into place. I got one last piece to make, and that's the molding that will go around the bottom inside of the upper cabinet. This will conceal the bottom edge where it meets the countertop and just dress it up a bit. And to measure the inside of the cabinet exactly, I just used 2 sticks and made a mark where they overlap. Then I just lined them up on the bench, and then I can use a tape to measure it exactly. And once I had that measurement, I could miter the one end of the molding and sneak up to the perfect length for the other end, and then glue them into place. The back one goes in first, and then the sides. I finished out the drawer boxes with Danish oil because it's super easy to apply, I can't overdo it, and it offers decent protection. And then the cabinet is pretty much done. Now it just needs paint, a countertop, and to get installed. I moved all my neighbor's stuff out of my garage and made room for a friend of mine to come in and spray some color on this thing. I could have done it myself, but I would have just messed it up, and this guy's a pro, and he has all the right equipment, so I just hired him, and he made short work of it. Then I had my countertop guy cut me a beautiful piece of quartz to use that has some gorgeous dark marbling in it that'll really go well with the paint color that was chosen. And once we had all the pieces, my buddies and I could load them up and haul everything up north to the rental property and put it together. The countertop got centered onto the base cabinet. The upper cabinet got centered on top of that, and the internal shelf got installed at just the right height. And here's what it looks like all done. We don't have the fridge in there just yet, but we put in the microwave on the shelf so that you can see how that'll look. The countertop just turned out gorgeous and really goes well with the rest of the cabinet. I love the walnut trim on the drawers, and the bloom undermount slides make them operate so smoothly. And the crown molding takes it from being just an ordinary cabinet to a really classy statement piece. All in all, it turned out just looking amazing. I'm really pleased with how it all came together, and I can't wait to get it installed into the room. But for now, I did exactly what you'd expect me to do with a brand new piece of furniture, and I took it all apart and I stuffed it into a storage locker. The reason is I'm going to be renovating the entire room over the course of the next few videos, so it'll have to sit here for a little bit. But we've got some cool plans, and the room is going to look amazing when it's all said and done, so I encourage you to follow along and see the entire transformation. Hey, if you learned a tip or a trick, if you had a laugh, or if you just enjoyed the video and the project, be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. And if you hated it, you thought the project was dumb, and never want to watch me or any other video I ever make again, be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. And for those of you that might be wondering, no, I'm not putting together plans for this project since it was so custom, but I do have lots of other plans for a ton of other projects available on my website over at fishersshoponline.com. Well, that's going to be all for now. Thanks so much for watching. Take care, and stay tuned for the outtakes. See you next time. Why won't you feet? Ow! I need my mallet of persuasion. I went to fasten in these nailers and I realized they're short. But actually, the nailers aren't short. I cut that dado for the center divider in the wrong place. So now, this whole carcass so far is wrong. And I need to scrap it all and go buy another sheet and start completely over. Oh man, that was like a $90 mistake. Doggone it. Looks like I'm off by a 16th. Crap. Why aren't you going in? Oh, helps if you don't have it in reverse. There we go. Ow! Oh! Alright. Pieces of my saw are falling off. Oh my gosh, when I rough trimmed this, I didn't leave enough room for the point. Oh my gosh. Do I I have to go buy a new piece of trim? Oh my gosh. What just happened? Okay. Oh, Shazbot. I'm about 2 seconds from burning this whole place to the ground. Crap. What did I do? Oh, I know what I did wrong. When I set the height of the bit, I had my piece sitting on the surface. I forgot to take into account the height of the sled, and that's why my tenon isn't really a tenon. It's not even there. It's way too low. This needs to come up much higher, which means I gotta do this all again. I gotta make a new one of these. Ugh, stupid idiot. But I just hit 10,000 steps. How about that? Yeah.